So, due to the fact that this year's G1 Climax has been taking up the vast majority of my time watching wrestling, all I really had time for this week, apart from that, was both the 2021 season premiere episode of Monday Night Raw and the 2021 Halloween Havoc episode of NXT. I wasn't exactly crazy about either shows, and I had a lot of other shows that I wanted to get into, but I just didn't have the time. Shit, maybe that's a good thing. I watch too much of this stuff anyways. By the end of the episode, I was about as exhausted as I've ever been after watching any episode of Monday Night Raw in recent memory. The nicest thing that I can say about this week's episode, though, is that it wasn't as bad as some of those other ones. And to be perfectly honest, this was one of the best episodes of Monday Night Raw that I've seen in recent memory, but unfortunately, that isn't to say that this episode was good. I mean, sure, it had its moments. I thought that the main event Fatal 4-Way ladder match was one of the best matches in the history of the Raw brand, even with the outcome being as predictable as it was. Keith Bearcat Lee had a squash match against Cedric Alexander, possibly teasing a feud between Lee and the Hurt Business, which is something that I wouldn't mind sitting down for. And oddly enough, I thought the match between Zelina Vega and Doudrop was okay. As far as Monday Night Raw goes, having this many positives going for it is shockingly rare. The negatives, though, as usual, were plentiful. The triple threat tag match between the Street Profits, the Alpha Academy, and the Dirty Dogs was completely void of excitement. The subsequent Raw Tag Team Championship match that came after it later on in the show was just as boring. Not even Matt Riddle going Tarzan all over the place could get me interested in what they were trying to put together. Dominic Mysterio versus Austin Theory was background noise for the most part. Carmella versus Liv Morgan was the worst match on the show, though that isn't outright to discredit both women. I'm just over this feud already, and I would rather see both women move on to different things. And Damian Priest versus T-Bar wasn't as much of a match as it was a spotlight on Damian's new Devil May Cry-ish inspired character, I guess. Like, doesn't Dante have the whole half angel, half demon thing going for him? Or am I thinking of somebody else? As for the in-ring promo segments and backstage interviews scattered throughout the entire episode, it was nothing that you haven't seen before. You got a little bit of Seth cackling here, an opening segment where one guy comes out after the other there. You got a decent war of words between Becky Lynch and Bianca Belair that, as far as we know, went as planned, which ended with a match being promoted for next week's episode between the two for the Raw Women's Championship, which is a match that I'm sure is bound to end via some fuckery of some kind. Though I can't praise this episode as a good show overall, I can say that it was a better show than I'm used to when it comes to Monday Night Raw. Every match and every segment was fitting enough for a season premiere, but I just would have preferred something a little bit more entertaining and a lot less draining. Originally, I was pretty hard on the debut of NXT 2.0, and honestly, I think that I'm still justified in hating that first episode as much as I did, especially because going into it, I was ready and willing to give it a fair shake and to do more than just write NXT off as being ruined under the control of Vince McMahon and whomever is in his camp these days. NXT was the only show in pro wrestling that I was willing to watch on a weekly basis, because I was pretty much their target demographic. Someone that's all in as a wrestling fan, as Triple H himself put it a few years ago. And throughout the ratings war with AEW, I was one of NXT's biggest supporters at the time when so many fans were jumping ship to board the AEW hype train. The AEW hype train that's still a hype train, in my opinion. I developed a loyalty to the NXT brand because they were the most consistent out of the majority of wrestling promotions, at least in the United States alone, and it was a hotspot for some of the hottest prospects around the world, like Kushida, Io Shirai, Imperium, MSK, Frankie Monet, and so on. And that's why it's so disheartening to see AEW take their place as the global hotspot for some of the hottest talents on the indie circuit, because AEW isn't nearly as good at developing stars as NXT was out of that scene. So, when I heard rumblings about NXT changing their ways as to exclude indie talents going forward and choosing instead to focus on making stars out of meatheads, models, and big meaty men, I was bummed. And I was even more bummed to see that NXT, that developed as it did over the years, seemingly go backwards and regress so hard as a way to appease the ones at the top and their outdated concept about what makes a pro wrestling superstar. And it pissed me off to see the very same fans that jump ship to AEW bitch and moan about how WWE is killing NXT when not even a few days prior to the rumors of the change, they were shitting all over NXT. Well, because it was a WWE product at the end of the day. And nothing is going to make those AEW fans part with their money more than a rallying cry of Fed Bad. But with that being said, I decided to give this version of NXT a chance once again and tuned in to watch their Halloween Havoc special. Because why the fuck not? I figured that maybe NXT 2.0 can show me that they can still put together a decent show. And much to my surprise, a lot of the new NXT still had shades of the old one. Halloween Havoc 2021 was an entertaining show, flaws and all. Even though I initially was agitated at the idea of NXT pushing a guy named Braun Breaker and hotshining him in the main event scene over wrestlers that had made actual progress in getting that title shot in the first place, see Kyle O'Reilly is the biggest example, I still enjoyed the match between Braun and Ciampa in the main event, even if I'm still not all that crazy about Braun and his knockoff Scott Steiner promos. Ciampa did a hell of a job carrying the match, and in doing so told a hell of a story along the way about how he's becoming viewed more and more as a wrestler from the bygone era in NXT, and guys like him are on their last legs as the promotion moves in to replace them with new talent, like a Braun Breaker or a Von Wagner. I wasn't crazy about Ciampa winning the NXT Championship out of nowhere to begin with. He still had a good thing going with Timothy Thatcher at the time. Whatever happened to him, by the way. And Ciampa winning the championship so soon in the way that he did felt so meaningless. The fucking index sweating segment main evented over that moment. I mean, come on, can you blame me for not liking that Ciampa's big moment of getting Goldie back wound up being completely hollow and forgettable? Ciampa seems to be doing everything in his power to not go down as a forgettable transitional champion though, so good on him for keeping up with himself. He had the best match on the entire show against Braun in the main event right where he proved that he should be, even if Braun or some other new guy is meant to beat him in the near future. Both the NXT men and women's tag team championship matches were really good. The women absolutely went out there and beat the shit out of each other, which fucking ruled. And both MSK and Imperium gave us one of the best lumberjack matches in recent memory. Roderick Strong versus Odyssey Jones was textbook NXT showing off their newer talents on the rise, while the pairing of Von Wagner and Kyle O'Reilly proved to be the exact fucking opposite of that. It's a damn shame what they have Kyle doing on the show these days after his feud with Adam Cole over a month ago. Malik Blade versus Joe Gacy, though, was a shining example of something that's working really well in NXT 2.0, with Joe Gacy becoming something of a Bray Wyatt-esque cult leader. Though I'm not so sure that he's built to last when he gets onto the main roster, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of the entire rebranding of NXT, but fuck it, who cares? I'm not watching this shit every week, so it doesn't matter to me. They broke that trust with me. I'm just glad that Malik and Gacy had a decent match that didn't end in some nonsense and had a clear direction. The show-long haunted house segments with Trick, Carmelo, Dexter, and Gargano was really entertaining. If nothing else, I'm stoked that Johnny's gimmick isn't being fucked with pretty much at all, and he's keeping on with the comedy segments with him and his new son-in-law. Johnny's easily one of the most entertaining parts of the show most of the time, whether it be wrestling or doing his comedy bits. The only two downsides on the show, though, were the Halloween party segments and the NXT Women's Championship match. And I mean, seriously, that fucking NXT Women's Championship match was dog shit. I don't give a fuck about Mandy Rose or what color hair she has these days. This toxic attraction bullshit is the beautiful people from TNA if it were less skanky and has one decent wrestler in the group in Priscilla Kelly. Mandy Rose was rewarded a fucking championship for dyeing her hair brown. Fuck off. The match that she had with Raquel sucked. The fucking thing ended with her shitty looking V-trigger. And just like that, she surpassed everyone else on the entire roster that's light years ahead of her. This entire show could have benefited from this match not happening in the first place. That match just weighed down the entire show a ton. Overall, though, Halloween Havoc 2021 was still an average show, as a lot of the flaws in this new NXT were mixed in with some of the old ones. But the biggest positive takeaway that I had coming out of NXT was proof that it still had a chance of being WWE's best weekly show, because the NXT as we knew it before doesn't seem to be completely gone just yet. And that just about covers it for me this week. Not great or even good shows, but they both had their moments. I'm likely not going to get into any WWE stuff next week if I do decide to push another one of these episodes out into the feed, but who knows at this point. See you whenever.